Sock Show. I'm the Trev. Sweet. Anyway, continuing on with retired numbers. And we're talking about the second one, retired in St. Louis. And like we've done before, and like we're probably going to do more times, it's not so much a superstar per se, as it is someone who's more of a foundation piece, someone who's more meaningful to the team's early or contributing success. So today, we're talking about one of the earliest pillars in St. Louis. We're going to talk about the number 8, which was worn by Barclay Plager. So let's talk about it. So Barclay Plager's 10-season career with the St. Louis Blues began on November 29th, 1967, when Plager, along with Red Berenson, were traded to the Blues from the New York Rangers for Ron Atwell and Rod Stewart. Now, while Plager isn't really a stranger at being traded by this point, having been traded to the Rangers from the Los Angeles Kings only 5 months prior, this would be the first time he'd be traded to a team that would afford him the opportunity to play NHL hockey, and one could directly thank NHL expansion for that. Now, this trade was also influential in it managed to unite Barclay with his brother Bob Plager, who we will talk about at some point, where they'd spend the entirety of both their time with the team together. Now, during the 67-68 season, Plager would assert himself as a stingy stay-at-home defenseman who could get the positions and the points when needed, putting up 20 points in 49 games, but also adding an NHL lead 153 penalty minutes to his totals. Now, as an expansion team, the Blues would qualify for the playoffs after eliminating the Flyers and the North Stars in 7 games each. They'd find themselves against the Montreal Canadiens, going to their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. Now, unfortunately for the Blues, this was the Montreal Canadiens. And if history has taught us anything, playing against the Montreal Canadiens for the Stanley Cup, especially in the late 60s, early 70s, usually doesn't end well for you. And it didn't end well for the Blues, as they found themselves eliminated in 4 straight to lose the Stanley Cup for the first time while competing for it for the first time. Now, for his part, Plager would put up career bests in every field as far as playoffs was concerned, with 2 goals, 5 assists, and 7 points in a career-high 18 playoff games, as well as a career-best 73 penalty minutes. And that's just in 18 playoff games. He was playing defense, and he's playing it very, very well. The 68-69 season would see the Blues acquire a third Plager, Barclay and Bob's brother Bill, and he would play for a little bit in St. Louis. And for a while, the team became known as the Plagers team. But either way you want to look at it, it didn't really seem to matter all that much. This would be the season where the Blues would clinch their first West Division championship, with Plager adding 32 points, including a career-best 26 assists in only 61 games. And thanks to his role on defense, the Blues would allow the fewest goals against amongst all 12 teams in the NHL for that season. And the 69 playoffs, well, they would see the Blues advance all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals for the second straight year, and meet the Montreal Canadiens for the second straight year. And wouldn't you know it, it was basically the 67 playoffs all over again. The Blues would be eliminated by the Canadiens in 4 straight years, or 4 straight games, for the second straight year, with Plager adding 4 assists in 12 playoff games. The 69-70 season would see the Blues continue their winning ways, clinching their second straight West Division title, with Plager adding 32 points in 75 games, including matching his career best in assists with 26. Plager would also play in his first of 4 NHL All-Star games this year in 1970, and while the Blues did qualify for the playoffs for the 3rd straight year and advanced to the Stanley Cup Finals for the 3rd straight year, instead of playing the Canadiens, they kind of got a bit of a breather. Unfortunately, they're playing the equally dangerous Boston Bruins, as in 67, 68, 69. the Blues would lose the cup in 4 straight games for the 3rd straight year, with Plager adding 2 assists in 13 playoff games. The 70-71 season would still see the Blues as a competitive team, finishing 2nd in the West Division, with Plager contributing 24 points in 69 games. Plager would also wear a goalie mask in this season to help protect a broken nose. Unfortunately for the Blues, though, this would be the first year where the playoff success did not equal a Stanley Cup final, as the Blues would be eliminated in 6 games, with Plager adding 3 assists. That's 6 games in general, not in 6 games in the Stanley Cup final. That's 6 games in general. 71-72 season would see the Blues make the playoffs for the 5th straight year, with Plager adding 29 points in 78 games, as well as adding a career-high 176 penalty minutes. And I'm sure by this point, the hope in St. Louis is not just to make the playoffs, but to make the Stanley Cup again. Because by this point, it's been 2 years removed since their last Stanley Cup final. But not only get there, but maybe actually win it for a change. Because, 0-3 in your early Cup success, you kind of want to break that, right? Right. But after making it to the semifinals, they would run into the eventual Stanley Cup champs and the same team that beat them in 1970 for the Stanley Cup, the Boston Bruins, who would sweep the Blues in 4. Go figure, right? Plager would add 5 points in 11 playoff games. The 1972-73 season would see Barclay Plager named the 4th captain in St. Louis Blues team history, a position he would hold until 1976. And it would also be the first season where it's just Barclay and Bob Plager, as their brother Bill was claimed by the Atlanta Flames in the 1972 expansion draft. And while the Blues would make the playoffs for 1973, they would just barely make the playoffs, having 3 more points than the Pittsburgh Penguins for the last spot in the West Division. Now, Plager would contribute a career-best 33 points, which also included a career-best 8 goals in 68 games. And it would also be the last time, or the 6th time, in Plager's career where he would record over 100 penalty minutes. And the Blues' playoff run, wouldn't last overly long, as they were eliminated by the Chicago Blackhawks, with Plager managing just 1 assist in 5 playoff games. The 1973-74 season would see the Blues miss the playoffs entirely for the first time in franchise history, and also be the last time and the 4th time that Barclay would play in an NHL All-Star game, with Plager finishing the season with 26 points in 72 games. The 1974-75 season would see St. Louis get back to their winning ways, finishing 2nd in the newly created Smythe Division, with Plager having his last real productive season with 28 points in 76 games. But even though the Blues got back to the playoffs, their time in it was very short-lived, as it kind of quickly came, just as quickly as it went, losing the preliminary round with Plager adding 1 assist in 2 games. 1975-76, however, will be Plager's last full season with the St. Louis Blues, and see him share his captain role with Red Berenson, the same guy he got traded to St. Louis with. Yeah, full circle, right? Plager will be limited to only 64 games, adding only 8 assists in that time. And the Blues would again make the quick visit to the playoffs, with Plager going pointless in the 1 game he played. So after the 1975-76 season, Plager would finish out his career in the CHL, but still managed to get in 2 games during the 1976-77 season, getting his last and only assist against the Cleveland Barons on April 2nd, 1977, and playing his last NHL game the next night in a loss against the Buffalo Sabres. Now, Plager would retire during the 1977-78 season after taking on a head coaching role for the same St. Louis Blues team that he had just finished playing for. And that's essentially a story of Barclay Plager as a player in St. Louis, and this is number 8. Let's talk about some stats. So in his 614 games played, all with the St. Louis Blues, he recorded 44 goals, 187 assists for 231 points, with 1,115 penalty minutes. And in 68 playoff games, Plager recorded 3 goals, 20 assists for 23 points. At the time of his retirement, Barclay Plager held the Blues records for games played and penalty minutes, both of which have since been broken. Played in 4 NHL All-Star games, 1970, 1971, 1973, and 1974. And on March 24th, 1981, he became the second St. Louis Blue to have his number retired. So, here's my opinion. So in retrospect, one would have to think the Blues made off like bandits when they acquired not just Berenson, but also Barclay Plager from the Rangers. I mean, this guy had no NHL experience coming into St. Louis, but definitely cemented himself as a cornerstone as far as the defense was concerned. If, the first 3 seasons they go from 3-2-1 or 3-1-2 in goals against, the fewest goals allowed, that tells you something. I mean, this was a guy that they molded nicely. And, he played all roles for the team. He was there for their first 3 cup runs. He was even the captain, came back as the coach. Like, he's done it all in St. Louis. So definitely one of the key pieces, not just in the players aspect of things, but also in the history aspect of things. Now, as for his defensive style, I mean, what's not to like? The guy was the solid grinder, solid sandpaper. This is the guy a lot of teams would love to have on defense. Penalty minutes notwithstanding, the fact that he was able to, like I said, be responsible for being on that defensive core that allowed the fewest goals against, that's a good accomplishment to have under your belt. So definitely well-deserved of a place in the rafters in St. Louis. And that's the second number retired by the St. Louis Blues. It's another one of Chess Hockey Shows. I want to thank you for tuning in. Don't think I don't appreciate the gesture, especially if you've made it to this point. If you have, well, a million thank yous your way. It's a great thing. Helps out the algorithm. But since you're here, if you've made it this far, if you want to say hi, if you're digging what I'm doing, give me a like. I think I've earned it. That red button that says subscribe all over it, if you haven't done so by now, you should probably consider hitting it. It'll make you feel good. So it's never a bad thing. Social that I never use, it's in the description down below. Let's move forward. As far as retired numbers are concerned, I got 2 big ones. I can't decide which one I want to finish. One I've been working on for a long time. One I want to get finished just to kind of get it done. But either way, they're actual superstars. That's the only clue I'm giving away. But either way, in the meantime, and in between time, be looking for more videos from Trev. Later.